Content over everything.
Okay, cool. So this is going to be a challenge to Muslims in general, but in particular, kind of a certain group of Muslims. And so this certain group of Muslims would be the ones who believe that in the ideal state, Islamic law should be implemented, and that part of that Islamic law should be that if you are a Muslim and then you convert to another religion and leave Islam, that then you deserve to be executed. So my question, particularly to that group of people, is if you believe that people should be killed for a crime which hasn't hurt anyone, and under normal circumstances you wouldn't kind of take someone's life simply for changing their opinion, changing their belief, you must have since real good justification for that. So you must have strong evidence that your reason for doing that is true. And so if your reason for doing that is because you believe that Muhammad told you to, and that this is part of your religion and you have the true religion, then the onus is on you to show that you do actually have good reason to believe that Islam is true, because you're claiming that kind of people should be killed for leaving Islam. Normally we wouldn't kill people unless we had good evidence, so we should apply that same standard here. So bearing this in mind, I want Muslims to justify what evidence, what good reasoning is there to believe in Islam in particular. And I've heard some discussions about this before, and I'll just address a few of them preemptively, and then hopefully later on, I'll be here next week as well, so if anyone wants to take up this challenge, they may. In particular, I'd be interested in hearing what Muhammad Hijab and Shamsi and all these other people who advocate Hanbali jurisprudence, kind of traditional Islamic law, what they think the answer is. And so, but I'll address kind of some other kind of typical arguments today. One of the typical arguments is that, the Quran has such a divine eloquence in its words that it must be from God. And there are several kind of rebuttals to this, but we'll get to them later. I'll just summarize the main arguments. That's one of the main arguments. Another main argument is that, sorry, just looking through my notes. Another main argument, and this is a favorite of one group of Muslims here in the park, kind of called EF Dawa, with Hamza, Imran, and Abbas. They kind of lay out a little flow chart that they believe proves Muhammad is a prophet. Their favorite argument is that, Muhammad claimed that he was a prophet, and so if you make a claim, like either you're lying that you're a prophet, or you're mad and you sincerely believe that you're a prophet but you're not, or you must be a prophet. And so they attempt to prove that there isn't good reason to believe that he was lying, and there isn't good reason to believe that he was mad, and so he must be a prophet. So let's look at both of those a little bit more carefully. First of all, this entire argument is based around historical evidence about Muhammad, which is kind of secondary compared to the Quran, and tertiary, you could even say. It's not very reliable if you're going to start looking through details of his biographies, of his seerah. And so you should kind of preface that this is kind of a weak form of argumentation to begin with, compared with actually showing from the Quran itself that the Quran is from God. But let's progress along this line of thought anyway. Was Muhammad mad? And so the main reason that they give for why Muhammad couldn't have been mad is because he was able to lead an army and kind of lead a state. And so, he must have been in possession of his faculties of reason in order to do that. So he couldn't have been mad. But what this leaves out is the fact that you can have many mental disorders but still be high functioning. For example, you could have temporal lobe epilepsy. And there are people who have temporal lobe epilepsy who end up becoming software engineers, who end up being professors of law, for example. There's a kind of article, if you'd like to Google it, called My Diary as a High-Functioning Schizophrenic, written by this Harvard law professor. And so when you're not having episodes of hallucinations, you are actually quite lucid often. And the second piece of biographical evidence to support this is the fact that there are many documented talks about Muhammad having seizures, which would actually line up quite closely with epilepsy. So, for example, in one of the biographies of Muhammad, the Seerah by Ibn Ishaq, there's a report that on page 72 of the Guillaume translation, that during Muhammad's childhood, he started convulsing, and his father said, "Oh, this boy is having a seizure." And then he later talks about this and says, "When I was a child, the angels grabbed me and they held me down and they shook my chest. Then they cut open my chest and took out my heart and put it in a little gold dish, and they washed the dish, and then they put all my organs back inside me again, and that was my first kind of, then they started putting, this divine knowledge inside me." So these are the kinds of delusions and hallucinations that you would find in a mental asylum. You'd find many people believing that God is speaking to me, and often they'll be kind of lucid apart from these kind of episodes. There are other kind of hadith that where his companions talk about his seizures and episodes when he's receiving revelation, and they also sound like seizures and convulsing. So, for example, there's a hadith where Aisha describes the revelation coming, and he'd break out in floods of sweat on a totally cold day. This is something that often happens kind of to schizophrenics when they're having kind of convulsions. There's one that says that describes him having convulsions, and they lie him down, and his companions say that his teeth would emit, or from his face would emit the sound of like droning bees, like either from chattering or from kind of making involuntary noises. So these are the kinds of things there are lots of things that push in favor of this idea that he might have had epileptic seizures and really believed, or not epileptic I should say rather, but kind of some sorts of schizophrenia and auditory hallucinations. Other hadiths, like for example, that claim that when he was a shepherd, he used to hear voices, and that one time a stone talked to him while before he became a prophet. And so all of these point to this idea, and it would explain why, in his early years, he's willing to put himself and his family through a significant deal of suffering, because, it is correct. They point out that in the early years of Muhammad delivering his prophethood, it isn't in his interests to claim that he's a prophet. He's he suffers, he gets ridiculed, he puts his family in danger, he has a boycott put on him because he keeps on insulting kind of the other gods and this sort of thing. And so this indicates someone who sincerely believes what he's saying. However, kind of in the early years of his prophethood, he didn't actually have that many episodes of receiving revelation, that many kind of convulsions. They kind of would often be years apart before he'd deliver a new sort of revelation. And also early on, kind of his revelations were mainly about Judgment Day and other kind of purely religious topics. Then when you look at later years of his prophethood, for example, when he's in Medina, then more and more he starts delivering revelations kind of exactly when an opportune moment arises, like someone will ask him a question, then the next day he receives a revelation about it. You'll find him, like, for example, editing his revelations, like he dictates a revelation, and then later a blind person hears and says, so the revelation is like kind of worse are those who kind of sit behind in their houses rather than go on jihad. And then a blind man says, well, what about me? I'm disabled. And this is while he's dictating it. And then he kind of redictates the verse and adds on, except those who are sort of disabled. So all these sorts of things start creeping in later in his prophethood, like convenient revelations that benefit him. Things like, God told me to tell all the people who stay with Muhammad after dinner, kind of don't stay too long because Muhammad is too shy to tell you to leave. Kind of, why would God do that? Or like kind of God sort of intervening and solving Muhammad's domestic dispute, like a squabble between his wives, and then God himself comes and says, you better watch out, you wives, because maybe Muhammad will kind of replace you with other wives. And Umar actually said that the day before, according to hadith. So these more and more make it seem suspicious that he's actively making things up. So kind of, I think the most likely explanation is that early on in his career, he made these claims on the basis of sincere delusions, sincere kind of like fits and kind of schizophrenia and auditory hallucinations. But then later on, he starts making it up more and more for his benefit as a mediator for the tribe of Medina. That's that kind of script, that kind of E.F. Dawah script, like, well, you have to conclude that since he can't have been mad and he can't have been a liar, that he must have been telling the truth. Like, we've provided like a very reasonable kind of alternative explanation. So he needs to provide some other evidence. Okay, you can't kind of subsist anymore on this kind of weak argument that's based on kind of dodgy sira, especially when other sira, which is like biographies, kind of provide a alternative explanation that's more likely. Okay, and so what are the other kind of arguments that people say, this is why Islam must be true, and this is why we can be certain that Islam is true? One of them, so I've already mentioned kind of this E.F. Dawah style argument. The other one has been eloquence, and I've mentioned that. And by the way, I'll provide links in the description below for all of my claims, once this gets uploaded online, because I've made a lot of claims and I haven't given specific references, but trust me, there are specific references. So just check in the underneath in the comments box, you'll see a comment from James SC, and I'll put them all there. So don't worry. Have skepticism for what I'm saying, and then fact check me. That's how we do things. We don't just believe because doubts are from Satan or anything like that. Okay, so there's two of the main arguments done. The third, or the next, kind of comes from this idea that the Quran contains scientific miracles because it contains scientific knowledge which couldn't have been, from anything other than God. And so, in order for something written in the Quran to be a scientific miracle, I propose, or other people have proposed, 3 criteria for that the kind of prophecy or claim has to meet. 1, the knowledge must not have already been in existence. So you can't say, I think that speaks for itself. 2, it has to be a specific claim and not be ambiguous or have alternative meanings, because otherwise you can't be sure that it is making a miraculous claim. It might be making some other dodgy claim. And 3, kind of the statements must be scientifically accurate. And so none of the supposed scientific miracles in the Quran meet any of these criteria. And so we'll hopefully ask some people kind of later on when they arrive, kind of which they think the most convincing scientific miracle supposedly is. And then we'll try and explain this to them. One of the common things put forward as a miracle is the idea that the Quran says that iron is sent down from heaven, and we now know that iron comes from meteorites, or some iron comes from meteorites. So how could people have known in that time that iron came from meteorites from heaven? Well, for one thing, kind of the word in the Quran used to mean sent down is often used just to mean kind of it was given by God, because also in the Quran it says that God sent down clothes. So you can't be sure that it is specifically saying that iron comes from heaven. Secondly, the Egyptians already called iron kind of metal from heaven. So you can't say that it was a miraculous claim because other people had this opinion as well. This is kind of one example of the kind of criteria that we'll use to debunk these so-called scientific miracles. There are many more of them, and so I won't go through them all now, but I want to, and I'll put a link in the description box or in the comment below. Just look in the comments, James SC, when this gets uploaded, and you'll be able to see that there aren't any scientific miracles in the Quran. Finally, there's the idea of prophecies in general. I've heard 2 forms of this. One, that Muhammad made prophecies about the future, kind of in the Hadith, which he couldn't have known about. The second, that there are prophecies about the future in the Quran that couldn't have been known about. And so the Hadith let's deal with first. Kind of, again, I think the best thing to say about this for now is that in the Hadith you will also find many, many absolutely false and shocking prophecies and claims saying that, for example, eating Arabian dates will make you immune to poison if you eat 7 of them in the morning, and obviously that's totally false. There are many, so you can't say that this is miraculous because he's making kind of some claims which appear to be true when there are other claims in the same body of literature where he's making totally false claims. That's called cherry picking. It's like if you kind of get some emails from a betting website and you see that week after week after week they've predicted the winner of a particular sports fixture, but then later on kind of you find out that this same betting website has been sending emails to thousands of other people saying the opposite thing. And so they're covering their bases, and you're only finding out about the kind of claims that happen to be true. You don't need divine knowledge for that. Okay, so secondly, so the Hadith aren't a sort of impressive source of prophecy. Like, it would be like looking at Nostradamus's prophetic claims, and you look at some of them, and some of them sort of seem vaguely accurate, but then others are totally nonsense. But then you only remember the ones that sort of seem vaguely accurate. That's not valid evidence for divine knowledge. Finally, there's the idea that kind of there exist prophecies of the future in the Quran. One of the most popular of these is the prophecy that Muhammad, during his life, said that during the war between the Byzantine Empire and the Persians, he said that the Romans have suffered a defeat in recent lands, but they will be victorious within a few years. Okay, so first of all, he says a few years. That's not very specific. That doesn't seem kind of like, if you have divine knowledge, you might expect God to be able to know exactly what year the Romans won in. But more importantly, though, if we trust the typical commentators and say that a few means 3 to 9, if you actually look at the timeline of when Muhammad said this, like when this surah was revealed, where he's Surah Al-Rum, when it was revealed, and then you look at when the war between the Byzantines and the Persians ended, you see that it ended 12 years afterwards, not 3 to 9 years afterwards. In fact, all that happened within 3 to 9 years is that the Romans had won a particular battle. So how is it a miraculous claim to say that, point out that one side will win a battle within the next few years? That isn't miraculous. So similarly, there aren't, there are no sort of very impressive prophecies in the Quran. And I'll ask Muslims later on when they arrive, what do you think is an impressive prophecy that proves that it's from God? And we'll see what they come up with. But, I've looked through quite a few of them, and they're all nonsense. And again, if you want to if you think that I'm being too hand-wavy and just making claims without evidence, then you can look in the posts, the comments that I'll leave below in the description when this is uploaded. Maybe not the exact same day that it's uploaded, but within let's say 2 days or 1 day. Yeah, the same day that it's uploaded. Okay, and then finally, as just one final cherry on the cake, there's the fact that in Quran chapter 54, it says that the hour is nigh, meaning the hour as in the hour of judgment day, the end of the world. It says the hour is nigh and the moon has split. So, neither of these things have actually come true. It's been 1,300 years and we still haven't had much of a judgment day yet. And the moon never split. There's no evidence that it did. If in fact there's evidence that it did not split, because if it did split, then it would be visible all over the world. And so other astronomers in Persia and Byzantine would have certainly also noted it down in their astronomical records, because these are people who noted major comets. They note many sort of major incidents in the night sky, but they wouldn't write down that the moon split. So it's kind of nonsense. So I guess we'll leave it there. And I'll sum up one more time. So if someone just claims I believe in this, I believe in something like homeopathy. I believe in something without any evidence. I believe in star signs, for example. That's fine. You can believe in star signs. You don't have any good evidence to support star signs or homeopathy, but you aren't causing any harm by it, and you aren't affecting other people's lives. But if you say, I believe in something, and that something tells me that if you convert to what I believe and then you leave again, you have to be executed. You should hold yourself to a higher standard, because then you're saying that you are justified and you have reason to negatively affect other people's lives. You have reason to kill people. So how can you say that you have reason to kill people if you don't have clear proof of what you're claiming? It doesn't make sense. So the the threshold of evidence which people who believe in standard Islamic law, the level of evidence that they are held to in order for it to be justified for them to implement that Islamic law is far, far higher. So these people like Muhammad Hijab, Ali Dawah, Shamsi, and probably every other main Dawah guy in Speaker's Corner, you have to actually demonstrate with clear evidence that people should believe in Islam, that there is clear evidence that Islam is true. You can't merely claim, oh, you can't prove that it's not true. You can't merely claim like, oh, it's just my belief. You can't prove that it's wrong. Like, how do you know? So, like, that's the challenge that you have set for yourselves by making these claims, and that I'm reiterating. And we'll see what you or anyone else comes up with. I'll be here kind of this afternoon until 4:30, and I'll be here next week as well. And so we'll see what you come up with. Okay. Yeah.
Why do you do this first? Because you're an Islamophobe.
You want me to answer?
What's your motivation?
Okay. And
What's your
question time.
Secondly, some questions. First question from Leon is, what's my motivation from doing this? I'll give a short answer, then a kind of more in-depth answer. The short answer is basically that I think the world would be a better place if fewer people believe. Oh no, that's not the real answer. The real answer is because I think that there's a significant chance that belief in Islam will have a negative effect on my country's culture and legal systems in the future. For example, Muslims in the future might want to ban blasphemy, ban kind of insulting Muhammad, like is the case in many Muslim countries. And there might be many people from the UK who believe that we should accommodate and placate this kind of demand. And so I consider that a risk, and I think that risk will be reduced if fewer people believe in Islam. So that's probably the main motivation. Yeah.
ContentCOE everything from your melody.
Man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV.
Manager. I don't have problem against you. Now you're attacking Muhammad like he was your enemy. And you said if you are Christian, you say no.
Muhammad is an enemy of disbelievers.
Like who?
Muhammad
What
orders
he
people.
say or what he do or what he taught us to be against you?
Okay, I'll show you.